This one, even worse than the last one as far as the amount of content I'd love to cover and the amount we'll actually get through. So same thing, I'll share the information with Teresa. I had 12 pages of notes about more about how test anxiety affects learning and these types of things. But in a short window of time, you guys know how to read, so right? I'm assuming. I shouldn't make assumptions. No. So I want to really focus on the specific things that we can do to anxiety-proof our classes and our exams. So a lot of the science stuff I will send out. I have an even more detailed one of these, so I'll put that together for Teresa to get out, or you can just get a hold of me. Just my wit email address there if you're on social media. So Twitter and LinkedIn, I curate all sorts of information about learning, teaching, and especially online. So if you like following people on those. So Facebook is actually a page that I created for my students with more motivation stuff and science stuff. But you can find me anywhere, and I'll share this information with you. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Primarily, what we can do as teachers to mitigate test anxiety. I mean, I can go into detail the fact that, of course, not all test anxiety is bad. I was very anxious about these presentations, which motivated me to put a lot of work into them. Right? Anxiety is a great thing in some ways, but if it starts to negatively affect your students, and honestly, we use exams as assessments, right? I truly want to know what students know. Not what they know when they freak out and their brains are being bathed in cortisol during an exam. So we cannot eliminate that. The elephant in the room is the fact that a lot of test anxiety comes from lack of preparation. I can lead a horse to water, but I can't make it think. So that's not my job. So if you have test anxiety because you didn't put in the work, then I'm sorry, I can't. There's no magic solution. So we're talking about students everyone has them, like they're crushing it. They're putting in the time. They're doing everything you ask of them. And then they sit down, and you could have a 5-minute conversation with them and clearly know they understand the material way better than their exam score showed you. So how can we minimize that? And that's what I want to focus on. So if you want to nerd out on the science, though, just get the rest of the presentation that I send out. I don't know how they'll do that, but I'll make sure Teresa has it. So again, like I said, this is what we want to deal with. The fact that we see students all the time. We're proud of the work they put in. We're proud of how engaged they are with the material. We're proud of all the grit and all the things we've been talking about, right? They're doing everything you'd want from a student, but they just can't prove it to you on exams. So we talked about the fact that it can be positive, and it just so what do we do? All right, so just what is it? A little joke there at the beginning. I don't know if you know that story, but Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, they were talking about pornography, and his definition of pornography is I really don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it. So that's what I meant by that. I mean, so don't think of the person that's freaking out because they didn't prepare. Don't think of the person that that's freaking out because of all the other factors in their life, etc. But the students that truly are giving you their all and can't prove it to you on exam. That is what I mean by test anxiety, if it actually is affecting their ability to perform. So if someone has positive test anxiety, stress can be very, very good or very bad. So if test anxiety is a positive stressor that motivates that student, don't change a thing. But if it's a negative one, and that's why we're here, how do we help? So, all right. So I'm just going to skip past this because we don't have time. But how common is this? I actually found multiple sources that put us in this range here, between 10 and 40%. Generally, 20% of people have terrible test anxiety, and 18 to 20% have moderate test anxiety. So almost half the students in your classes, face-to-face, online, hybrid, are dealing with us to some level. So some are basically having problems that I'll bring up at the end that I've had to recommend they go out and and get help or accommodation plans, or I've actually counseled students on how to deal with their anxiety. But usually it's not that extreme. It's just, honestly, I just try to create a class that's going to minimize that anxiety. So how do we do that? How do you decrease the chances that a student is going to be anxious? Well, they need to be prepared. So we're going to talk about that. How do you create a resilient student that feels prepared, so shouldn't have as much test anxiety? And then what can we do on our end? So those are the two main things I want to hit on today. So we talk, these are the actual causes of test anxiety. Lack of preparation is not what we're talking about, but fear of failure and poor test history. So I want to tie in the discussion I'm having today How can we look? How can you learn things from your past history with exams that can hopefully help you moving forward? And then how can we, as instructors, actually prepare students for exams so they don't have to, flame out on the first exam to figure you out, right? You hear that all the time. I heard a student in my micro class the other day talking about it. They were in whatever class they were talking about. Now they talk about they've seen the exam. They get an idea of what to expect. But I would argue your students should know what to expect, prior to the first exam. Don't use the first exam as I did terrible, but hopefully moving forward I can dig myself out of that hole. And I just want you to know, this can be misconstrued. I'm going to talk about being a positive influence in your students' lives and creating a place that keeps them out of a fear-based mindset in the classroom. But I'm not talking about being their buddy. I'm not talking about making things easy. They're totally different. So I'm supportive, and I want to be supportive. I want to focus more on how far students have come than how far they still have to go. These types of things. But that does not involve making courses easy. That does not involve letting students manipulate you or continue to give you excuses and allow I'm not bending over backwards to accommodate students in a negative way. But I want them to know that I'm on their side. So this is where I really want to start. Your students should never feel like you are standing between them and their education, between them and their future. That's the whole "you shall not pass" thing, right? That should never be the case. You should be their guide. What are they saying when they say, "I still like lecture. I think it can be done very well," but everyone's saying we shouldn't be the sage on the stage. We should be the guide on the side, right? So, are you a shepherd or a Sherpa? I think of a Sherpa, right? They're willing to. They even give their lives sometimes. They will do everything in their power to get somebody up this mountain, right? So, is that who you are? Are you this positive guide for your students, or are you? I don't know who he is. I'm not big on science fiction. I like Gandalf, right? So I've seen the movie, but so are you standing between your students and success, or are you beside them, prodding them forward and motivating them? That's the what does your class feel like? And how do you know? So how do we measure this? Kind of like what Jeff has been talking about. Do students tell you that that they felt unbelievably supported, or do they tell you that you changed the way they look at things? Occasionally a student may even tell you changed their life, right? Is that the kind of influence you have? Or on the other side, are you having students saying, "Man, you were terrifying, but that the stick you were using motivated me to learn"? I guess there are two ways to get students where you want them, but that's what I feel. You just want your class should just ooze the fact that you're there to support them. And I can't measure that, but that's the feeling I try to give out, and I think it works. So you should be a part of their team. You should not. So you should be their coach. So I want to kind of define. If people ask me about my teaching strategies, I really say two things. Number one, I just try to treat every student like I hope my kids are being treated by their students, by their teachers. That's kind of a general rule. But then I look at teaching as the same thing as being a coach. So I've coached in the past. To me, the definition of a coach, which then means the definition of a teacher, is to make people do what they don't want to do to get them where they want to be. So that's why I'm not talking about being their friend and saying, "It's okay you didn't do your work." I'm saying, I'm going to make you do a lot of work, but I will support you, and you know that I'm there for you. And I think that is what will prepare the students for exams in a positive way. So that's what I mean by the environment that we're building. Now, we'll get to the specifics now. So we have to build a resilient student. So what can we do so that students come into your tests confident? And I'll talk about things like reviews and test reviews and stuff. I'm not saying you just put everything that's going to be on the test on a test review and they can memorize it. And of course they're going to be confident coming into class. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about sharing old tests and then still using a ton of those questions. They're more confident because they've actually seen the test. That's not what I mean. I mean making sure they feel confident in two things: that they do know the content well enough, and number two, that they understand the test. There shouldn't be. So I like to say, and as you'll see later, that I don't teach to the test, which is a big concern. I know, especially in the world of standardized testing, especially at the K-12 level. I've done some co-teaching and done some classes out at the high schools, and you see the teachers sitting around the lunchroom like, how can I get the students to do better on this test? Not how can I do better? How get my students to learn more? So I think that's a big deal. So you don't do that, but they should know that if they understand this content, they should be fine, and they should understand what your tests are about, like not specific questions, but the format of the test, and did you really make a test that assessed the things you said were important? Because like I mentioned in my earlier talk, I do not want my students to know everything equally from the textbook. I want them to know the most important stuff. And to me, if something is important enough to assess, it's important enough to teach. And these are all kind of some rules that I'll tie in here later. So we need to make our students be better students. And there's only, I like to create this environment, lay out the feast is a term that Charlotte Mason in homeschooling would use. But you can't make the students eat it. And that's why I said if students aren't prepared, at least you can feel better that you've created an environment where if a student really wanted to be prepared, they could be. So every week you should be telling students, where should we be? What should you know? So maybe incorporate some review into every week. However you want to do that's completely up to you. Practice quizzes, these types of things. So every week they should know, where should I be? What should I know? Am I on pace or not? How much time would a student spend in this course this week if they were going to succeed? All these kind of things. Just no surprises, because that changes all the time. I have weeks where students don't have to do as much. I kind of call those catch-up weeks, especially in the online classes, because there might be a week where there's not a big lab here and there's not a test, these types of things. So I have weeks where I would say this would be a phenomenal time to get caught up. Or not to, being here at this conference too, I'm missing both of my anatomy classes because they're Monday and Tuesday. So that's what I'm having. They're working on projects that are designed to really catch them back up because they're not where I need them to be. My face-to-face classes are flipped classrooms. So if they're not where they need to be, it screws everything up. So catch-up weeks can be built into your classes occasionally. So students should constantly know, what should I know at this point? And then I also like to add here, why is it important you already know that? Because I'm going to be building onto it. So maybe that's the anatomy teacher in me, but chapter 1 is foundational. Chapter 2, which is that's it. It really fits. I don't know in your disciplines how much of this overlap there is. I'm sure we all have foundational knowledge students need to know, and that's what we teach them first. So I just constantly remind them. It's super important you remember that. Like none of my students think remembering histology is important. Or it's like, well, what I'm going to ask you about those every single time from here to the end of AMP2, I'm going to ask you about these tissues. So how could it not be important? Or the surface anatomy terms. I make it a big deal. Like, trust me, you really need to know these, because if you don't, then good luck knowing bones and muscles and everything else. So I constantly reminding students what they should already know and why. So I'm basically telling them, if you know what I said you should know at the end of this week, you should feel pretty confident. And that's where building that confidence comes from. I don't surprise them with what I expect them to know. And I think that's a big issue with just saying, how should you prepare for the test? Just know everything in the chapter. I don't think that works. Maybe it did at some point. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to work now. So I think that this is what I mean by kind of forcing students to. If they don't want to keep up, that's fine. But I'm not going to lose any sleep about it because I have laid out the plan they should be following. So teach them how to learn. I can't go into all the details of this, like the things students should be doing from the fields of positive psychology, or teaching note-taking skills or test-taking skills. We don't have time in 45 minutes, but I did lay all that out in the larger presentation. So you can become a resource for your students and say, your notes kind of suck, so let's learn how to take better notes, and then that student should be more confident. Or let's teach our students how to look at a test and how to take it in the smartest way possible. Boost confidence. So it's all about making them feel more confident. So study time, if you have face-to-face classes, you could actually build it right into your class. But think about how could you, in a sense, force students to be studying. And I will tell you that's something that I do with my content review videos. The fact that even in my face-to-face classes, because they're flipped classes, and then I have the online hybrid classes, I tell them exactly which video they should be to at which time, and I can look at their notes at any time. So and I actually give them credit for their notebooks at the end of the semester. So I am actually, I don't believe in having students do things that they're not, their time is valuable, so I do make it worth their while from a point standpoint, but they have to keep up. So I am actually forcing my students to study. And I'm giving credit to them for doing it, but still, if you can think of a better way to force students to study, then please let me know. But that's actually what's worked really well for me. So I'm actually forcing students to study. Now, spaced repetition, I noticed that Jeff brought that up, in these new learning styles of, learning things and then actually, so we focus and focus and focus on learning and learning and learning, but we don't focus on recalling information. So spaced repetition is a way where you study this stuff every day while you're learning it, then start to study it every other day, and then every third day, and actually you purposely spread out the amount of time between when you look at material so that you do forget some of it, and then you force your brain to recall the information. So I actually took a class on learning, and they said that was their primary method according to the research for information. So how do we do that? So I definitely want feedback from you guys and things that you do. So how do we? Yeah, you can teach students about it, but how do you force them to use it? Any thoughts about how in your class maybe you could do that? How could you? I mean, this is where what I do is more and more I'm using assessments as learning tools. So 2 weeks, so maybe there's a practice quiz where you just learn this stuff. Here's a practice quiz. Well, building some of that into the next practice quiz. So I'm sure we all do cumulative midterms and finals, and there's even ways to use those. But if you do more assessments, and they're not even always worth credit, and if they are, I kind of replace other assignments. But I think that's a really good way to force students. See, again, they're going to do the bare minimum. They're going to try to survive. So if you really want most students, unless they're very intrinsically motivated, to use spaced repetition, you're going to have to force them to do it. So the idea of practice quizzes that are accumulating material, and you're asking stuff they learned 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago, and 3 weeks ago with less and less frequency, I think that's a really good way to use it. So I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for the fact that we can actually build classes that force our students to be better students. I wouldn't use the word force, but that's why I use the word coach. I'm making you do what you don't want to do because I want you to get where you want to get. So that's an idea. So just early in the course, teaching about basic test-taking skills. That could be a one-page Word document or a video you find on the internet. I use a lot of, if you want resources for that, test-taking skills and study skills, note-taking skills. I really like College Info Geek on YouTube. He's from Iowa. I don't know if he's from Iowa. We went to Iowa State, I know. He's got a podcast and all manner of things, but he has amazing videos, wildly popular on YouTube, about how to do well on multiple choice exams or different note-taking skills. He probably did a video on spaced repetition. So these might be resources that you're just sharing, curating, and sharing with your students. But teaching them about test-taking skills and note-taking skills will build their confidence. So we're trying to create a student that's less likely to have test anxiety. Then we'll try to create a class, getting here really soon, that doesn't generate as much test anxiety. So that was all about how you can help your students to help themselves. What are some things you can try to have students help them to help each other? So the idea of group work is clearly group work appears to be important, but we don't often think about group studying, or maybe force is the wrong word, but the idea of a study buddy in online classes has been something I've been playing with. So randomly assigning students, they share contact information. When they have content questions, they're supposed to go to each other before they come to me. I'll gladly help them, but that really defeats the purpose. I truly think that trying to find an answer and not finding it, you can actually learn more than me just telling you the answer. So maybe you could try having study groups or study buddies in the online and hybrid environments. So you could do peer discussion groups where you're kind of a moderator, or hopefully you just kind of sit back and see them helping each other. So that's something you can do. I like to use Zoom, so that's something you could do. So you're giving the students all these tools. They should now know how to take better notes, how to manage, how to take the tests better. And then when they're studying, they should have a lot of resources. So really that ties into the whole idea of creating good resources too. So if you do all of these things, your students can't help but feel more prepared. And if they don't, it's not from your lack of effort, because you've certainly laid out the table for them. So you can, I just always like to say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it think. So that's where we build a student. But now us, what's our job? So what is, our job is to be that guide rather than a roadblock between a student and their next class, a student in graduation. They have to accomplish everything you need them to in the class. They have to manage, they have to meet or exceed all your expectations, but you can do it in a way that doesn't create anxiety. So that's where I think I don't know if you ever heard, positive parenting is something that I've really focused on. Actually, the Brain Rules book that Medina that was mentioned there at the end, he wrote Brain Rules for Children. It's really, really fascinating. So I think that the carrot works way better than the stick. And I think that works in our classes just as well as it does with my son. So just back to creating that positive, supportive environment. If I'm a student and I don't know something, I know that my teacher will help me. And that's where the whole, and I know we have to teach them responsibility. I know all of this. You have to you have to balance these two things. But I don't understand how to do this assignment, and that reply that it's in the syllabus. It doesn't work. Students need support, and some need more support than others. So you can call that hand-holding if you want. I call it supporting students, and I think that, and honestly, it doesn't take much more time to actually reply to that student, and you strengthen the relationship rather than hurting it. So that's what I mean when I bring this positive parenting approach. I don't spank my students either, by the way. So that's a positive. So that's what I mean. So there is neuroscience behind that. When you learn positive or neutral information, right? Your brain stores positive and neutral memories in the hippocampus, the primary place that your brain stores and consolidates memories. Well, fearful, negative emotions, this amygdala, this deep-seated fear-based part of our brain gets involved. And I think that influences how the memories are stored, and most importantly, for test anxiety, how they're recalled. So if a student is in a good frame of mind, because I've tried to create a positive environment and just motivating them. I constantly remind students why they're in school. They're not in my anatomy class because they want to know bones. They're in my anatomy class because they want a better life, right? And I constantly remind them. So don't sit down, feeling bad about the fact that you have to study and you want to watch TV or party or whatever you're doing. Don't feel bad about the fact that you need to know this information. So you just don't want to have that negative stuff in your brain when you're learning. So I try to get students, now you could go into the idea of journaling or gratitude, but what I try to get students to do is to remind themselves when they sit down to learn or sit down to come to class why they're there. Because they want that better life for them and their kids. They want to serve as a better role model for their kids. My students are in health science programs. They want to make the world a better place. I mean, that's truly what I hope it is. They want to help their fellow man and woman. So I think that this mindset stuff is very important. Now, you might think it's kind of woo-woo, but it does appear to help. And there's lots of studies to back this up. Next one, we can do. So just trying to create, so in an online environment, it's just how you communicate with your students. If you have, the welcome videos or your emails are positive, constant little reminders about the fact that your students do matter to you, and they should be focusing on the progress they've made, not how far they have to go. These are all little things, but trust me, I read the student feedback. It really matters to students when you do that, when they feel supported. So, all right, then our test. So what are we doing with our tests? So what we can talk about, creating tests, but I think it's very important that we learn from our tests too. So I have students constantly learning from their tests. I want them to look at the tests they've taken. If I don't show them the whole test, I show them the missed questions because I think with learning from their mistakes, the analogy I give them is the fact that I only remember 2 test questions I've ever been asked, and it's because I missed them, right? Frank Hefner got me with cottage industries at Western Iowa Tech in 1996 in my Western Civilization class. Then in my gross anatomy final, I missed the esophagus. It was just a total brain fart. I'm just staring at this thing, and I couldn't figure it out what it was. So, and I'll never forget. So learning from their mistakes is important, but we need to as well. So we should be evaluating our tests. And I'm not saying, like Susan and I have done a lot of evaluating of the HAPs and stuff. I'm not saying, not enough students aren't answering this question correctly, I'm going to make the question easier. No. If it's something that I absolutely know they should know it, and they should know it in a way they can answer that question, that's not on me. But if you see from your exams or last year's exams that students are really struggling in an area, then how can you make them feel more confident? Now, hopefully, how can you make them actually be more confident because they now know the material? So I think we should be learning from our exams as much as our students should be. So, any questions so far before we keep going on? All right, graded work has to go back. This is a nightmare issue for students. They're constantly talking about it. I just kind of listen, right? It's so important just to listen to students talk, and these same things keep coming up and up and up. Like you can't give an exam until you've turned in their work, so they know what they know is true or not. So that is a major problem. If I was a student, I would raise quite a stink if you had me take an exam. Let's say you had me take an anatomy exam on bones and muscles, and you hadn't graded the work where I showed you if I know the bones and muscles or not. That is not fair. So you have to grade stuff, give the students time to see it, give them feedback, and then give them time to interact with you about it if they need to. So things just have to be graded. And when that's not happening, it really is doing students a huge disservice. I mean, why wouldn't they be anxious? I have no idea if I know the bones and muscles because my teacher didn't tell me if the work I've done in that area was correct or not. So that to me is something you have to do. This is something I do. I teach a wide variety of classes, so it does help me. I don't know what your guys' schedule will look like. And when I've got students that are taking my classes and nursing, there's always something they have to do. But I actually stagger testing schedules just to try to make it so, like my microbiology class, my unit exams are on a schedule that keeps them, the unit exams from anatomy are about 2 weeks apart. So rather than just having both of them on the same week or real close together, I think staggering testing schedules, if it's something you can do. Now I have that luxury because I teach 3 or 4 different classes and a lot of times the same students. So, but if you don't, you don't. But if you do, just the kind of thing to consider. Or maybe you do. Maybe if 90% of your students are in another program, like nursing or something else, or whatever you're looking at, maybe you could get a sense of when their massive projects and exams are, and try to stagger that. Because I want to know what my students know, what they can learn and what they can show me they can learn. And I also know, though, in my microbiology class, I learned this. I just started teaching micro in the fall and spring. I've always taught in the summer when students were only taking it. And I was just blown away by how well they were doing. Then the first fall I taught it, I was like, oh crap, these are nursing students that are giving me like 10% of their time. And I understand why. I'm in the nursing classes, more credits, and you can only fail at once. I get it, right? So now I'm assessing what students can learn in a micro class. I'm trying to compare students where the only class they're taking is micro, or where honestly micro's on the back burner in a sense as it should. So if you can take some of the pressure off the students, give them a week where they can truly focus on your course, they should be more confident, and your assessment will mean more because if they actually put in the effort, then you can get something from that data. So just quit giving so many tests and quizzes. And no, I'm teasing. So, all right, what can you do outside of the classroom, virtual or otherwise? Review, extra review opportunities, online office hours. I just started doing this where they're just Zooms, that students can come to, and you can record them. So if students can't come at that time, at least, because usually if a student has a question, of course, other students do. So online office hours is pretty cool. I'm probably a little too liberal with this, but my students they can text me. I'm fine with it, so the students can text me. They can get a hold of me lots of different ways. We interact on social media sometimes. So there's lots of ways to get a hold of me, but I found that the office hours is pretty effective. And what I've heard is some of the students that can't make it, or even could but don't want to because they're more introverted and wouldn't want to be in the Zoom, they're still getting something out of it. So are you making yourself available to students that have questions? Because if they have questions and you answer them, of course they should feel better. So that's how I do the office hours, but there are probably other ways to do it. Anybody have anything like that? Any standing times or where students can do Zooms with you? These types of things.
So Zoom is a
Skype-ish, Skype, Google Hangout. Yeah, I don't know why Zoom is one I got into really big.
Well, I was going to mention that Canvas has something similar to that built in, conferences.
Yeah, somebody was telling me about that. Honestly, I haven't. I have not explored Canvas to everything that it's capable of. That's for sure.
Later today, it's after lunch. Kendra Booth from SWIC is giving a presentation, a breakout on
the conference feature. Awesome. So if you're interested in this, yeah, Zoom works, and the college pays for the Zoom Pro account. But yeah, if it's already built into it. Why?
And you can have yourself on. They see you. It's video format, but also there's a whiteboard, and you can upload your presentations, all that stuff in while you're talking live with students.
Awesome. I'll be checking that one out myself. So
you can record it downside,
And you can't get them off, can't download them off. Oh, okay. All right. I've never done this, but I was looking at the research and looking at everything we could possibly try. The idea of study logs. So I guess I indirectly do that with my videos. The fact that they have a pace they're supposed to be keeping, and I can tell, how many students have watched the videos and who's been interacting with them and those kind of things. But so a study log potentially. I don't want to be a babysitter. I'd teach K-12 if I did. But I want If students aren't doing what they need to do, how do we help them do that? So I have no idea if that would work. I've never done it, but it kept coming up in the research. But yeah, most of this research has to do with high school kids. So, and I remember carrying that little red book around when I went to East High School, and so maybe I wouldn't fit for what we do. But I wanted to share everything that I could find where the research was showing that it trended positively. So that's something to do. And then just constantly, it's a minor thing, but I mean, every week, my weekly announcements, my weekly email, the assignment tab for the week, they constantly beg students to reach out. Like you have to be connected to your classes. I was told once at WIT that 85% of the complaints with online instructors are the lack of communication and feedback. So we can't do that. If a student feels alone, they're going to be anxious, So it's like my 3-year-old, when I leave his site, he all of a sudden gets really scared. So I'd feel the same way if I was a student. I had a question, and 3 weeks ago I emailed the teacher that question, and they never graded the assignment that would have told me if that question was, if I knew it or not. Like it's just a recipe for disaster. So, I mean, I'm not telling you guys what you don't know and what I'm assuming you're all doing, because you're here. I'm assuming hopefully we're the cream of the crop, and that's why we're here. We just got to get everyone else to follow that lead. All right, so now, how do you actually build a class that will hopefully make at least some students immune to test anxiety? I think review is just wildly important. I think that, from a learning standpoint, repetition is important, spaced repetition on top of that. So I'm a huge fan of review. You should, so I've already mentioned every week, here's what you should know. If you don't, here's how you should figure that out. And it's easy in face-to-face classes. The first 5 or 10 minutes of every face-to-face class is what should we know up to here kind of thing. But I am a big fan of test reviews. I don't know if you guys use study guides. I do lecture outlines and study guides. I don't know if you use them, but I'm a huge fan of them for all the reasons I've already mentioned. They don't need to know everything equally. So, and I don't mean a study guide where if you memorize it, you're going to get a good grade on the test, whether you know it or not. What I tell students is if you understand the concepts on this study guide, so that's where it comes to being kind of masterful with making tests. So don't make test questions where if I could read that and memorize a short answer, I'll get that test question right. But if I truly understand that concept, I can get the question right. That's what I mean. So if you're afraid of study guides because you're like, I just don't want to give the tests to people, then create a different study guide and then create a different test. So that's the way I look at it. So I think that, so my study guides, if students are going to spend 8 hours studying, I want them studying the most important material. And that's to me what a study guide does. You guys know I kind of like tech stuff, so I do a study guide, and then I also later will give them an audio where I actually go through the study guide with them. It's a long thing. It's not just don't just give me the answers. It's you want to sit with me for 45 minutes or an hour, I will explain these things to you. So that's what I do, but that's not for everybody. So creating audio and video resources, the students have things to study from, but to me that study guide and then linking it to how we make our exams is the key to me. And the feedback I get from students says the same thing. They feel less anxious and they have less anxiety about the test because they know I've given them a roadmap to success. If they've used all the resources and they've kept up with the pace of the class and they understand the concepts on this study guide, they should feel confident going into the test. Now, of course, students abuse it. I can't stand it when students are like in the classroom and they're clearly just trying to get the study guide filled out. I really try to avoid that. Like when they ask me a question, I'm like, God, it sounds really familiar. Sounds exactly like a question that's on the study guide, right? And they're just waiting to fill in the answer. I don't like when they do that, but students are going to abuse these things. I would always rather err on the side of giving more value and resources to students, even though some are going to abuse it, because hopefully more will turn into a positive thing. So, type of test. So your students should know about your exams, that there's technology involved. That's why if you're going to have your students taking online exams on the computer, or then they should have already taken a practice test, so they know how to use all the technology. They know they know what they're doing, right? Like some students are trying to use their phones and stuff. I know they can get away with it, but with the touch screens, you got to be really careful with it, changing your answers, right? I've had students take tests on iPads and stuff where just scrolling up and down the screen is changing answers. So you always want to make sure that the technology isn't terrifying the students. Look when students go to the testing center and they realize they don't even know their password because their computer memorized it. So things like that. Let's just get rid of every source of anxiety we can. So students should understand the format of your tests. If they require proctors, that needs to be dealt with right away. They need to understand that entire process. A big one for me now has been that, the remote proctor now. That took a lot of work, a lot of hand-holding to try to get students through that, and I just haven't been a big fan. So Teresa told me that they're going to have me pilot this honor lock option this summer. So let's hope that's better, because overall I have not enjoyed remote proctor now. But I don't want a student getting ready to take their exam and all they can think about is, holy bejesus, I cannot figure out how to use remote proctor now. It's just a bad situation. So practice exams so that students can get used to technology, making sure they understand all those types of things. Test format, whatever you're going to require. They shouldn't know the questions on the test, but they should certainly understand the format and understand what you're going to expect of them. Time limits. Can they use calculators? Can they use scratch paper? All these kind of things. Answer these questions so when they sit down and take an exam, they can be 100% focused on the content and not other stuff, right? Our job is to remove all those hurdles. If a student does bad on the test, I want it to be because they weren't prepared and didn't learn, not because the technology was a headache and they got all stressed out about the proctor situation. They forgot their Canvas password because their Mac just remembers it, right? These kind of things. You can eliminate a lot of these problems. Just preparation. So think of the problems your students have had and then just make sure they don't happen again. So I think that's important. Practice quizzes. I actually use. These are really my. Where other instructors, if you might like to use worksheets or other kind of assignment work you like to do, I like to just use practice quizzes, and then they have to answer what they can and then figure out what they couldn't, and I think that's a very important learning process. So that's what I actually use the publisher test banks for those. So they're similar to what I do, but I write all my own test questions, so makes them harder to Google. So not forever though. But yeah, so I think we already have, unless you're using the publisher's test bank, and even if you are, you could. There's tons of stuff out there. So there's lots of ways that you can create these banks where students can be taking practice quizzes, which gets them used to test taking and the content that you would expect from them. So I think these are all things that would help students feel better. Because really, if they've been doing the work, you have been forcing them to stay on top of things. You've been forcing them to use spaced repetition by what you assign or where you expect them to be at, and then you've minimized the surprises for the test. So I think the things that I've said here absolutely reduce test anxiety. So now designing tests. This is something that I wanted to really bring up. I really believe in using study guides, and some people don't. And I also really believe in not testing much on minutia. I want to know if the students know the important stuff, not some random fact spit out by a test bank from the publisher. So to me, if it's worth testing on, it's absolutely worth teaching on. So it's just I just truly because students can't learn everything. So I want to assess how well they're learning the important stuff. So students just are blown away when they're like, I cannot believe these are the kind of questions I was asked, and it was maybe never brought up in class. That's the whole catch-all we use, right? Where, well, if it's in the textbook, it's fair game. And I don't know. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. So it doesn't seem to work for students either. So that's something that I would really consider. Making sure that the valuable information is what you're testing on, but not in a way where they can just memorize and regurgitate it. They have to be able to think through it. So my new thing now is actually I was just talking to Susan about this, giving students case studies. So they have the case study. Then there will be questions on the exam from that case study. But case studies are a whole higher level thinking than just a basic multiple choice question. So they have the case study. But that doesn't mean that they're going to easily figure out the answers. They have to understand what's going on in the case study if they want to answer those questions. So in a sense of actually I guess it's part of a study guide, but I've given them part of the test, but they're going to have to interpret it in a way that they actually understand it. Now, I didn't give them the test. I'm not going to give them a Pearson case study where every answer is already out there, or if I did, I wouldn't use those questions. So I still want. There's ways to make smart exams. that can be helpful. All right, so this is all about the testing stuff, and I really think that I guess we got to tie up. I'd rather take some questions, but I'll get this out just as I already mentioned all these things, like how to be a resource for your students on, if it means a lot to a student if, at the beginning of the semester, use here's some information about note-taking skills, here's some information about test-taking skills. Just being that resource makes you look like a superhero. So, all right, any questions? Anything you guys have done? What do you see with how have you mitigated test anxiety in your students? Or have you tried anything? Yeah.
I'm an academic advisor, so I see it more from the student's perspective. And many times students doing well, going along fine, and then they enter that clinical nursing program, and then it's like everything's different. The questions are different.
They haven't learned how to think. They've learned how to memorize, and that's a big problem. Yeah. So we at those foundational levels, that's why I'm starting to do more case study based stuff. I'm trying to start to remove those training wheels a little earlier because it is a shock. It is a shock to these students. Absolutely. That's where you're really getting to. That's the difference between do you have to think for yourself or memorize. And so early on, you need some of that. That's why this whole idea that lecture is always bad. There is critical foundational stuff that I don't see how I could teach any better than actually explaining it to students and using analogies and metaphors and stuff. But once you reach a point, if you can't, so in anatomy or micro any class, I am deconstructing the human body so I can teach it to you. You've got to put it back together at some point, or you're never going to be good in healthcare. So yeah, that's an excellent point. So the anxiety, maybe I could mitigate some of the nursing students' anxiety by learning how to write NCLEX style questions and sprinkling them into my class. I guess it just moves the anxiety to my class. No, but by the time they get there, at least they've seen it. These students are constantly complaining about nursing tests, and I'm like, you don't understand. They're preparing you for the questions you have to be able to answer to survive. It's just you can complain about it all you want, but what if the NCLEX was the first time you ever saw those questions? Same thing with HAPS, right? Students are just blown away with HAPS. I'm like, no, the questions are just deep questions that, so if you're blown away by the HAPS, then you haven't seen enough of that level of question before you took it. I'm sorry, the HAPS is the Common Human Anatomy and Physiology Society final, so it's like a national standardized test for anatomy classes. So, yeah, it's an excellent thought. Collaboration is something that we have to do better. So I hear that from nursing students. Why am I not trying to solve that problem in advance? Not all my students are nursing students, but most of them are. So, and it wouldn't hurt. Would it hurt a PTA student to learn how to think better? That's a good point. So that's great. Anything else? What do you think? What did I miss? What can we do? What can we do? Do you have that student in your head? We're just I have to help this student. I know they know so much more.
I struggle a lot at times. Nursing instructor, I struggle tremendously with students who don't know the content.
Mm-hmm.
I go through and it's I go through their tasks. They get really poorly on the task. I'm like, how did you study?
Mm-hmm.
I read your notes.
Yeah.
I'm like, what else did you do? Well, I read your notes. I rewrote it. I went to the book. I did this. Listen to your PowerPoints. I'm like, but how do you know this material? And I think that's the one thing I'm really struggling with is how do they know the material?
Yeah.
Did you ask yourself questions back about the content?
Sure.
Did you go that step further?
I put that in here somewhere about.
So I think that's the one thing that I struggle with.
Yeah, just not enough time. But I put something in there about how reading is clearly not enough, and how you need to be whether you're kind of creating a log of ideas or you're synthesizing material on your own as you go. Yeah, just reading is not enough. Yeah. That'll get you through, some real basic classes, but not as we can progress on. So.
I think at the very beginning of a term, it's important to say those things.
Mm-hmm. It is
not enough.
Yeah.
And that how do you
Yep.
learn the material? How do you ask yourself questions about the material?
Yep.
Maybe nobody's teaching students how to think. I don't know. Maybe they need to.
Sure. And just how big of a waste of time it is to learn something at such a basic level. You can do fine on your exams, and then a week later you'd fail that exam if I gave it to you again. Studies have shown in high schools, students can go from an A to an F in an exam in as few as 3 days. So yeah, you're just ramping up your working memory. You don't know anything. So I just get sad sometimes when I hear these nursing students in the hallways talking about things like, I know you know that. I know you should know that. I was the one that taught it to you. They're just so wrong about things. So and you can't learn everything, but It's just that if you put in the time now, it's just going to make your life easier. And I can't. If somebody can figure that out, give a presentation next year at how to get students to understand that, how that they're shooting themselves in the foot. So I'm not going to cut into your lunch. So if you need anything, I'll share this information. You can reach out to me any way you want.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.